There's a great story on leadership that happened to me last year. And this is actually a story that I've used in our refresher classes because it's just a great story on what leadership is and where leadership comes from. And it's also a story on safety. And in last year on the fire out of Kettle Falls, the stick pin fire, I had a dozer and a transport up there working, and they were up against their 14 days. So I went up with our transport supervisor, and him and I drove up to take over the transport and the dozer. He took the transport, I took the dozer. So we got there in the evening after the dozer operator and the transport operator got off shift, and kind of setting the stage for this is we got there, and we had his handover, and they said we'll wait till morning. We won't leave till morning till we can introduce you to the overhead. So that night we stayed in camp, and the fire was in flux at that point and changing camps, and so we went to briefing. And in briefing, they pointed out who our strike team leader was, dozer boss, who the diff soup was, and so we had that handoff, and that went really seamless. And it was the standard thing that happens on the fire line. They tell you, they says, well, I got to go to another briefing, but here's the map, and you just go up this road. Go up Road 24, about 10 miles, and you find a well-used spur off to the right. Go up to the right, and go up there another 2 miles, and you find staging. And the hair on the back of your neck stands up then, right, when people start talking to you. But one of the things that happened in briefing is a weather guy kept talking about a weather event, a wind event. And so the whole time he was talking about high winds, 40-mile-an-hour plus winds, ridge winds, maybe more. So, and I been to a lot of fires, and I said, okay, I've heard a lot of this before. But my transport operator, who's been to a lot of fires too, he picked right up on it. And he kept in my ear, he kept talking about, you hear about the wind, you hear about the wind, So we went to the briefing, and they kind of passed over it and didn't really talk about the wind. And then we went out to we went out to the line, to drop point, to find our transport and dozer, which had been left on the line. So we got out there, we found the transport, and we couldn't find the dozer. So we had to drive our division looking for the dozer. And this was still early morning, so the fire activity was relatively down. And as we drove, the first thing that came to mind is that we were in box canyons. There was a road that went up one box canyon, wound its way up the top, and came down another box canyon. That was kind of our division. So we went up there, we finally found the dozer, and when checking the dozer, I was bringing it back down. As I was coming down, we noticed that 2 crews and 3 engines in this one box canyon were deploying. We're not deploying, but we're starting to mop up on a really dirty burn. It was dirty, a lot of islands and stuff. And my transport driver, he says, man, we got to watch out for this. There was a lot of fuel here. And I'm going, yeah, sure. So we come on down the hill, and they had actually sent 2 more engines up, and we came down to the drop point, and we were waiting for an assignment with our dozer, tied in with our dozer boss. And my transport driver kept going, the high winds are going to come, load that dozer onto the transport. And I said, no, I'm not. We're just going to wait. Don't get excited here. And so finally I said, okay, just so he quit bugging me, I went to load the dozer onto the transport. And right before I got it on, I said, I'm not going to do this. And I just shut the dozer off. And then he comes up to me and says, no, we're going to load it up now because the winds are coming. And so I loaded the dozer on. And so he really put a sense of urgency in me. This is a transport driver, the lowest guy on the whole division, right? But I loaded it up, we strapped the dozer down, and we walked over to the dozer boss, and at that time, I heard a jet engine. We all did. We turned around and looked up on the ridge, and the trees were bent over like that, just howling. I have no idea how high the wind speed was. No chatter on the radio, nothing on the radio about the high winds. And it was just howling right across these two box canyons. Dirty burns, both of them. So over the radio, then, hey, we could use a tender up there. So the tender that was on our division, he starts to go up there. And I happen to know the guy. I've worked with him before. And a little old guy. And I said, so I jumped out of the rig. I jumped to where I was, went over to him, and I said, watch out. I says, look up on the ridge. And you hear that? You can see it. And he said, yeah. He goes, but they told me to go on up, so I'm going on up that canyon. One lane road. So he goes up the one canyon, just gets up there. And about this time, we had a shot crew and a contract crew working on another canyon, on the other box canyon. They came screaming out of that canyon. They were done. And the engines that were with them came out. They, for whatever reason, the strike team leader on this other wing did not evacuate. They did not pull those troops back. And so he gets up there, the tender, gets turned around. Before he could ever nurse any of the engines, they said, okay, we're going to leave, because trees were coming down. He got about, I would say 200 feet down from where the top, below the crew and the engine, and a tree came down 10 feet in front of him, burst into flames on fire. And this little boy has been around, and he says, so he puts it in reverse to back up, and but another tree comes around the top of the tender. So for all purposes, everybody behind him was trapped. And they jumped out. So luckily, the crew behind him jumped out with saws, put out the fire on the tender, cut the tender out, and when they were able to, it didn't hurt the tender, they were able to actually get off the hill. So they all come off the hill, and the first thing the tender operator comes up to me and says, you coming to tell me how dangerous it was probably what saved everybody up there. I says, well, I'm not the hero. It's that transport driver. The guy the lowest guy was thinking about safety more than the diff soup, more than the strike team leader, more than anybody else on the hill. It fills in the, where leadership belongs. It's everybody, and it's where it comes from. The only regret I have from that is I did not go to operations and call out the diff soup and the strike team leader for their inactivity.